Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin. This video contains 3 animals that were once thought to be folkloric, fictitious, or extinct until they entered the light of human knowing, and some of them did so rather dramatically. First, the giant squid. The giant squid is an excellent example of something that is rarely witnessed but often heard about, and something that has taken a strong mythology of its own. And that mythology historically negated its reality to academics and truth-makers. One of the first mentions of the giant squid came from Aristotle. He described it as growing up to 5 ells long. An ell is the length of the elbow to the end of the middle finger. Aristotle described the giant squid as roughly 19 feet long, and that falls short of both the giant squid and the colossal squid. And therefore, he very well may have been identifying common, quote, calamaris that surpassed the average size of the species for one reason or another. The Norse believed in the kraken. Today we know that their stomping grounds are the best places to retrieve or examine giant squid. As always, we know far less about archaic belief systems than we often pretend to, but we know the kraken appears in a Norwegian natural history catalogue written around 1250 AD. Which is translated into English in The King's Mirror, and I'll read the passage from 1250. There is a fish that is still unmentioned, which it is scarcely advisable to speak about on account of its size, because it will seem to most people incredible. There are only very few who can speak upon it clearly, because it is seldom near land, nor appears where it may be seen by fishermen, and I suppose there are not many of this sort of fish in the sea. Most often in our tongue, we call it kraken. Nor can I conclusively speak about its length in ells, because the times he has shown before men, he has appeared more like land than like fish. Neither have I heard that one had been caught or found dead, and it seems to me as though there must be no more than 2 in the oceans, and I deem that each is unable to reproduce itself, for I believe that they are always the same ones. Then, too, neither would it do for other fish if the kraken were of such a number as other whales, on account of their vastness, and how much subsistence that they need. It is said to be the nature of these fish that when one shall desire to eat, then it stretches up its neck with great belching, and following this belching comes forth much food, so that all kinds of fish that are near to hand will come to present location, then will gather together, both small and large, believing they shall obtain their food and good eating. But this great fish lets its mouth stand open the while, and the gap is no less wide than that of a great sound or bay, and nor the fish avoid running together there in their great numbers. But as soon as its stomach and mouth is full, then it locks together its jaws, and has the fish all caught and enclosed, that before greedily came there looking for food. Based on this account, there really is no indication that the kraken is actually squid-like, and though the phrase, like other whales, is used, it seems unlikely that the anonymous describer meant it was a whale. The word that we translate into whale most likely meant a very large creature. This 1250 description is interesting nonetheless. It describes an enormous creature, much larger than anything we know of today. In relation to size, it's more like a land mass than an animal, and it apparently has a self-sustaining ecosystem. It opens its mouth, inviting fish to enter and feed on debris. Then it shuts its mouth to feed. The speculation that there are only 2 of them may mean that the creatures are purely mythological in origin, or that there are only 2 left, or that they have incomprehensibly long life cycles. Either way, reproduction seems to be a gray area. Regardless of what exactly the Norse meant by kraken, tales of large, tentacled creatures circulated throughout the increasingly less ancient world, though no specimen ever seemed to have made it to where it needed to be. But the folklore was so prolific that a juggernaut of science, a man named Carl Linnaeus is often considered the father of modern taxonomy. In 1735, he describes a giant squid in one of his major works called The Natural System. He called it microcosmos and described it very much like how we know it today. But his claim was so contested and ridiculed that he would leave microcosmos out of his written works for the rest of his life. Even then, folklore had no place in systematic studies until all of a sudden it did. It was a chilly October day in 1873, off the southeast coast of Newfoundland, in a place called Conception Bay. Daniel Squires and Theophilus Pico were laying nets to catch herring. This trip was special. This was the first time Theophilus brought his 10-year-old son Tom, who was eager to learn his father's trade. The 2 men and 1 boy were laying down nets when they saw what at first they thought was a mass of netting wrapped up in debris, and they thought it might be worth salvaging. They made their way to the dark mass just beneath the waves. Upon arriving to it, they saw it was purplish red in color and seemed to be one body. Being an enlightened sailor of 1873, Daniel Squires did what any self-respecting man of culture would do in such a situation. He poked it with a stick, and instantly the blob sprang to life. The torpedo-shaped mass sprang down, and the tentacles sprang up. The beast wrapped its 2 arms over the vessel as the creature funneled the boat into its mouth. They heard what they said sounded like the snapping of a giant beak, and it turns out that's exactly what they heard. Daniel stabbed at it with his boat hook, while Theophilus smacked it with an oar. But it was young Tom, who was probably currently considering a more land-based profession, who saved the day. He grabbed a small hatchet that was there for a far less dramatic emergency. He began chopping at one of the great arms that had looped over the deck, and once he began chopping, the creature took off, and in its haste, tore off the already partially severed appendage. Only seconds after it started, all that was left to show of the encounter was 1 long arm and ink in the water. They didn't bother removing the arm until they got to shore, but this is certainly one way to retrieve physical evidence. The arm was 19 feet in length, and obviously not cut at the base, so in full it was much longer. The difference between this encounter and others like it was the piece of physical evidence that clung to the side of the vessel. It was around this time when the first specimens began to wash ashore as part of some kind of natural die-off. A zoologist based out of Copenhagen named Steenstrup is generally given credit for the first definitive giant squid description with an adequate specimen. And so finally, the same circles that refuted Linnaeus's claim jumped on the bandwagon as if they were on board the whole time. Make no mistake, the giant squid was a cryptid. It was a fantastical and contested belief that functioned outside the sphere of academic knowledge and was reliant solely on folkloric and anecdotal information that varied by each faction of observers. Even the most distinguished claims were refuted, but obviously that is no longer the case. I suppose the next cryptid can more accurately be called an example of Lazarus taxonomy, which is inherently cryptic. In this case, a Lazarus taxon is a creature that was thought to be extinct and then proven not to be. And that is, of course, the coelacanth. The first fossil was found in 1839. It was believed to have gone extinct 66 million years ago in the late Cretaceous. Scientists believed that the coelacanth had gone extinct because large, slow-moving bony fish are ideal for providing fossil remains, yet none could be found after the Cretaceous. So it was believed they died off in an extinction event. But 99 years later, in 1938, a museum curator in South Africa named Marjorie Courtenay Latimer informed local fishermen that she was looking to acquire unique specimens. Not long after, she received a phone call from a fisherman informing her that he had caught a fish that he couldn't identify. She took a taxi there and had no idea what it was. Her immediate notes described the find as, quote, 5 feet long, a pale blue, with faint flecks of whitish spots. It had an iridescent, silver blue-green sheen all over. It was covered in hard scales, and it had 4 limb-like fins and a strange puppy dog tail. She said she put it in the back seat of her taxi, and took it to her museum, wherein the only conceivable match was that of a fossil from 66 million years ago. Another coelacanth specimen would not be brought to light, or at least reported, for 14 years. And it is interesting. This was a huge find. It had traits that have never before been witnessed outside the fossil record. Obviously, hundreds of bounties, for lack of a better term, were placed on this fish, and yet, Latimer's specimen remained alone until 1952, when the next one was retrieved off an island chain near Madagascar. We now know that the coelacanth's elusivity is a result of their affinity for narrow cave systems, their comfort in extreme depths, and their nocturnal feeding habits. But of course, the strangeness of the coelacanth doesn't stop with the nature of its discovery. Coelacanths are ovoviviparous, meaning that the male fertilizes a female's eggs while the eggs are in her body, and the embryos in the eggs develop inside the mother until they are hatched and then finally born. In contrast, most fish release eggs that are then fertilized externally by a male. The coelacanth bearing its young internally is a trait shared by some amphibians, sharks, rays, and seahorse. This is in contrast to oviparity, wherein the embryo develops in an egg outside the mother. Most fish, reptiles, birds, and the egg-laying mammals are oviparous. Of course, there are many variations on reproduction, and the coelacanth's reproduction method is rare, but not unique. An even more unusual aspect about the coelacanth concerns its classification as a member of the clade Sarcopterygii. Sarcopterygii is a clade of fish that also happen to be tetrapods, or four-legged animals. It is very unique for a fish to be considered a tetrapod. Typical fish fins are used for steering and only minor propulsion, more reliant on the muscular body for acceleration. But the coelacanth, as well as lungfish, have muscles, and more importantly, bones, that provide greater power to the fins and help them act more as autonomous muscles, which makes sense, because we now know that coelacanths spend a lot of time in narrow cave systems, where they're likely doing a lot of dragging, clinging, and digging. These overly developed fins likely are also important for internal fertilization. Because of this striking feature, a great big deal has been made about the coelacanth, and I don't really see why. This fish has fins that have arm-like bones. This fish has no bones. This fish has no fins. This fish extracts oxygen from the air. This fish uses electricity. Life comes in all sorts of ways and means, and fossils really don't care about anyone's agenda. All in all, the coelacanth is primarily known for 3 points of interest: arm-like appendages, they carry their eggs internally, and the species came back from the dead. I know this topic is a little dry, and I hope I explained it accurately, as obviously there's a lot more information involved than I care to fit into a fraction of a YouTube video. But no cryptid channel is complete without at least the mention of a coelacanth. Because it is a bit remarkable, really, that we found 66-million-year-old fossils before we found the flesh. And keep in mind, we have literally millions of bony fish fossils, while the entire fossil record we have of the known great apes could fit into a 5-gallon bucket. Maybe 2. Speaking of great apes, the next ex-cryptid I'd like to discuss is sometimes called the Bili Ape. It has also been called the Bondo ape and the lion killer. Long had biologists and primatologists in Africa heard tell of a distinct species of great ape living in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But an endless civil war made research a poor life choice. It wasn't until 1996 that a Swiss photographer and anti-bushmeat campaigner named Karl Amann purchased some photographs that poachers took with game cameras. The residents of the Bili and Bongo forests called this a lion killer, whereas they referred to typical, already classified chimpanzee as tree beaters. Allegedly, the lion killers are aggressive, sleep on the ground like gorillas, leave waste twice the size of the typical tree beater chimpanzee, have a tendency to be bipedal more frequently, and are gargantuan by chimpanzee standards. A team of biologists headed out to the DRC in 2001, to the vicinity where the game camera photos were taken. The world-renowned German-born American scientist George Schaller was part of the investigation. He was one of the first to study gorilla in the Virunga mountain range when he was only in his mid-20s. The expedition was well-experienced, well-funded, and well-equipped, and just under a year of field research yielded no sign of the primates, though the team confirmed the local notion of the, quote, lion killers. Scientists would not return to the region until 2004. The 2004 expedition was led by Dr. Shelley Williams. She has a PhD in psychology, and her area of study overflowed into primate cognition. This expedition wouldn't yield any photographic or biological evidence, though Shelley Williams' team located abandoned ground nests and several footprints seen here. And though the 2001 and 2004 expeditions yielded even less evidence than a typical Bigfoot hunt, Shelley claims to have had a chilling, up-close encounter. She said that in 2004, quote, we could hear them in the trees, about 10 meters away, and 4 suddenly came rushing through the bush towards me. If this had been a mock charge, they would have been screaming to intimidate us. These guys were quiet, and they were huge. They were coming in for the kill. But as soon as they saw my face, they stopped and disappeared. Apparently, no cameras or recording equipment could be leveled in time. Not long after Williams returned to the States, she caught a bullet in the neck as a result of gang violence in the parking lot she happened to be driving through. The projectile collided with her spinal column and splintered into her liver. Paralyzed, she was taken out of the game. But she maintains that the Bili ape is either a distinct species, a gorilla-chimp hybrid, or, quote, at the very least, a unique, isolated chimp culture that's unlike any that's been studied. It wasn't until 2006, when a biologist named Cleve Hicks and his team from the University of Amsterdam conducted a year-long study. In just over a year, they logged a total of 20 hours of observation of these creatures. Through DNA, the team confirmed that the primates are in fact Eastern chimpanzee. So much has been said about the Bili ape, yet this fact is often totally dismissed. The Bili ape is genetically consistent with the Eastern chimpanzee. Let me break it down a little more. This is the genus Pan. The genus Pan contains 2 species, the primary or common chimpanzee, and the bonobo. There is only one type of bonobo, therefore they have 0 subspecies. The common chimpanzee has 4 subspecies. The central, the western, the Nigeria-Cameroon, and the eastern chimpanzee comprise the 4 subspecies of the common chimpanzee. The Bili ape is a chimpanzee, genetically consistent with an eastern chimpanzee, whereas the bonobo is genetically distinct enough to merit its own species of Pan. The DNA taken from the apes of the Bili forest is simply that of eastern chimpanzee. Yes, they do appear to be larger by a small margin, and their jaw muscles seem to be more muscular, and this footprint seems ever so slightly larger than we might expect from an eastern chimpanzee. But you know, I wear a size 11. Just because my friend down the street wears a size 15 doesn't mean we're a different species. Not even close. We're talking about very minor differentiations that may seem like a big deal, but really have no more bearing than the difference between a person who is 5'9" and a person who is 6'4". I know I'm claiming an unpopular opinion here, but I simply can't find anything to corroborate claims like this. This is a Google recommended question. You know, the People Also Ask feature? I'm blotting out the website because I'm not trying to throw anyone under the bus. But it says, Bili apes are a large subspecies of the common chimp, with their closest relative being the eastern chimpanzee. These Bili apes can grow up to 6 feet tall and can weigh an estimated 400 pounds. To put that into perspective, a common chimp is around 3 feet and 100 pounds, but can easily manhandle even the strongest humans. And that's just so misleading. The website has no sources. It just claims that they're 6 feet tall and 400 pounds, and then says chimps are 3 feet tall and 100 pounds. So it described the Bili ape as upright and the average chimp as a quadruped. Known or catalogued chimpanzee should be some 4.5 feet tall upright and about 150 pounds at large but not unhealthy weight. If a typical chimp is almost 5 feet tall and 150 pounds, then the claim of a Bili ape being 6 feet tall and 400 pounds doesn't even really make that much sense. There's just nothing I can find to support that claim. And obviously I'd be fascinated if there was reason to believe that, but I just can't find any. 5 skulls of these chimps were purchased from bushmeat poachers. Some people, Dr. Shelley Williams included, have used the skulls to defend the fact that Bili apes are gigantic. The skulls are copyrighted, so I can't show them to you, but the largest of the skulls measures 220 millimeters in length. Yet the standard length for established chimp skulls fall within the range of 190 millimeters to 210 millimeters. So these, quote, gargantuan skulls are 10 millimeters larger than average. To put that in perspective, 10 millimeters is a little more than half the length of a dime. In other words, the Bili ape skulls are larger than standard by what is basically a margin of error. Perhaps the only reason to suggest a significant size variance is, in fact, Dr. Shelley Williams' encounter. I really hate to speak ill of anyone who has endured such tragedy, but I can't help but wonder what she was thinking, or at least what her motives were. If indeed 4 of these creatures, quote, rushed her, I'm not entirely sure why she would maintain that they are either a unique species, subspecies, or hybrid. If she saw the same creatures that Hicks observed, and they were in the exact same area, then she really should have decided that they were firmly chimpanzee, if not chimps with a slight size variance. I'm having trouble putting my finger on it, but something about all of this smells fishy. Here's the evidence for the alleged Bili ape that we've all heard about. Game camera photos, which I can't show you because of enforced copyright, which are claimed to be that of giant gorilla-chimp hybrid, but just look like chimpanzee to me. A set of skulls, which I also can't show you because of enforced copyright, which are claimed to belong to giant apes, even though they are merely 10 millimeters larger than average, about half of a dime. Mind you, not 10 millimeters longer than record chimps, 10 millimeters longer than average chimps. We have photos of this footprint, which I can show you, which measure to be 28 centimeters in length, compared to the average chimpanzee foot length of 26 centimeters. The skull is 4.7% larger than average chimp skulls. The footprint is 7.6% larger than average. To put that in perspective, that's the difference between a size 12 shoe and a size 13. Almost. This is a sketch of me. I weigh just about 10 pounds more than a large chimpanzee. And this is me with my head 10 millimeters larger, and my foot 1 size larger. There would simply be no discernible difference. And most notably, the DNA is consistent with an Eastern chimpanzee. Dr. Shelley Williams, whose PhD is in experimental psychology, was the only one to suggest giant apes or gorilla hybrids. Carl Amann, Hicks, and Schaller were all quite certain they were studying chimpanzee. Like I said, something was fishy about how this topic was introduced, and it doesn't take too much sleuthing to figure out the common denominator. But I'm not much of a stone thrower, as it were. So you can ask, if the Bili ape is just an established type of chimpanzee, why are you saying it's a cryptid? It's a cryptid because of culture. Not human culture, but because of their culture. The chimps of the Democratic Republic of Congo are cultural cryptids. The study conducted by the University of Amsterdam found no indication that the chimps of the DRC are more aggressive than typical chimpanzee norms, though to be clear, typical chimpanzee norms are quite aggressive. The rumor or nomenclature of lion killer, or more aggression than the typical chimp or tree beater, is likely, in my opinion, simply a result of the slight size variance. If this population is in fact ever so slightly larger than normal, then quite frankly, they're likely more intimidating than usual. According to anthropology.net, Hicks confirmed rumors that these chimps do in fact seem to sometimes nest on the ground, and the team even found evidence that the chimps had feasted on a leopard. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. Ground nesting and consuming a leopard are cultural variances. Any troop of chimpanzee is more than capable of nesting on the ground and dispatching and consuming even large predators. All chimpanzee are known to eat meat and expel threats. The fact that a troop of these particular chimps seem to have consumed a leopard is not really discordant with our understanding of established chimp norms. Between 6 and 20 100-plus pound chimps should have absolutely no issue terminating a leopard. Though to be clear, Hicks notes that there is no evidence that the chimps actually took out the leopard, as it may have died or been injured from an encounter with a buffalo, elephant, snake, or even another leopard. Primates are the ultimate opportunists, after all. The fact that the chimps may be marginally larger than average, sometimes nest on the ground, and consume or dispatch threats is not indicative of a new species or even subspecies. It is indicative of a new culture, which in my opinion is equally as astounding. The most noteworthy behavioral distinction that Hicks observed is that these chimpanzees are habitually and astoundingly timid near human habitation such as roads and pastures. Hicks notes that it is impossible to make contact with the subjects within 20 kilometers, or 12.5 miles, near any sign of human habitation. After that 12 miles, where the chimps ostensibly felt in control or safe, they would eagerly get in visual range of human visitors, stare intently, and then move on. These encounters would last merely a matter of seconds, when they were noticed at all. Hicks said that this happened with two groups on several occasions, and he notes that the behavior is curiosity, not aggression. The DRC was in a state of war. Fighters need meat, therefore chimps were on the menu. So the chimps more than likely learned that poachers would rarely venture more than 12 miles into the bush. 12 miles is a lot more in African jungle than it is most places. They were curious of humans in the safe zone beyond 12 miles, but practiced total avoidance in what they considered to be the danger zone. I'd guess that's why the 2001 and 2004 expeditions roundly failed. They didn't get out far enough. So if chimpanzee can practice total avoidance to biologists and their surveillance equipment within a stated range, who is to say that a North American primate cannot do the same? Especially one vastly more intelligent and more mobile, as bipedalism suggests. The rather confusing and frankly misleading saga of the Bili Ape, or Eastern chimpanzee, is evidence of the fact that apes not only have a cryptic nature, but a cryptic culture. That is to say, the level of stealth they employ is conditional to their environment and the environment's perceived threats. There is, in fact, overwhelming precedence for these types of creatures to intimately understand the threats of their environment. They watch, they observe, they make mistakes, but rarely twice. This case study verifies that chimpanzee will not be observed unless they want to be. And we're not even talking about a different species. Imagine if we were. Think about it. Hicks and his team had 20 hours of contact in 18 months. And these are just chimpanzees, who he himself admits were quite curious. Imagine if they weren't. His 20 hours of contact were all initiated by the chimpanzee. And that is what's so important. However brief, contact was made on the chimp's terms. Landmines probably have a tendency to have that effect. If the chimps did not want to make contact, they wouldn't have. These primates will not be seen unless they want to be seen. Not until they decide it's appropriate. And that is what I find so compelling about the Bigfoot hypothesis. It isn't a secret. Ask any primatologist. You don't find them. They find you. When they want to. And if they don't want to, then you won't. This is not an instinctual shyness we're talking about. We're talking about a shared culture of cryptography. If something like this came out of North America, it would be said, of course it's mostly concealed, and too far away for detail. Well, guess what? That's what primates do. Ostensibly, just like a hoaxer, they obstruct their view and keep at a conceivably safe range, not giving away details until they have determined that the new object is not a threat. So to me, it's not a gigantic leap to suggest that a North American primate may simply determine that any unfamiliar presence is a threat regardless of distance or circumstance. Much like what Hicks said about the Bili Ape, that the subjects initiated contact, I believe the same very well may be for a biped in North America. Contact is typically initiated by the creature, meaning we are playing a game entirely on their terms. A game that they clearly don't want to end, and probably for good reason. Like I believe I already said, my take on the Bili Ape is not the popular opinion. Trust me, I would have loved to make a video saying that in the DRC there is a new species of ape, like giant chimpanzee, but 400 pounds, and they nest on the ground, they're 6 feet tall and walk upright, and that lends credence to whatever people are seeing in North America. That video would have saved me a lot of time, but it simply isn't the case. Anyway, make sure you like and subscribe for more soon-to-come content, and as always, Thanks an awful lot for listening.